proud to be hosting this book launch, Unlocking Knowledge to the World. We are pleased to announce the release of the Humanities Open Access book, Recalibrating Teacher Training in African Higher Education Institutions, a focus on 21st century pedagogical challenges. The Northwest University in South Africa has generously supported this publication by AOSIS Scholarly Books. Get a first-hand view of the engaging conversation from its subject specialists.
Good day, readers. I'm Professor Gideon van Tonder from the Northwest University, the co-editor and co-author of this volume. Today we will share some highlights from this remarkable AOSIS volume. I have a panel of authors who will briefly discuss their contributed content. As we proceed with the interview, I will introduce each of them. This volume, Recalibrating Teacher Training in African Higher Education Institutions, focus on 21st century pedagogical challenges, explicitly address the challenges African higher education institutions faced pre- and post-COVID-19 era. The emerge of COVID-19 has accelerated the need to incorporate technology in African classrooms. Higher education in Africa faced the additional burden of meeting the ever-increasing educational demands of students. I want to introduce you to my first guest, the Deputy Dean for Research and Innovation at the Faculty of Education at the Northwest University. Prof. Washington is one of the editors and authors of a chapter in this book. I want to welcome you, Prof. Washington, for this interview. Prof. Washington, I want you to contribute and elaborate on the rationale behind the book. And additionally, could you provide an overview of this volume, 3 parts?
Thank you. As editors, we realize that teacher education has always occupied a contentious space in world debates. There are several views that seek to influence the transformation of present-day matrices of epistemologies and their subsequent pedagogies, both in higher education institutions and the Department of Basic Education. The advent of the Fourth Industrial Revolution has heightened the scope of debate in education pedagogical reformation. This volume therefore endeavors to engage its readers to appreciate some of the pertinent concerns relating to education in the African context. Some of the issues speak to equal opportunities and online delivery systems. The authors are cognizant of the opportunities and challenges presented by the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The availability of technology has become a pace setter in terms of modern pedagogies that seek to infuse technology in teaching and learning. The persistent challenge is the uneven ground on which the recipients of the pedagogy stand. Many students are living in abject poverty and can hardly afford technology-enhanced education because they do not have gadgets such as smartphones, iPads, laptops, tablets, etc. The African governments are faced with a mammoth task of ensuring that learners and students from all walks of life are afforded equal opportunities in technology-enhanced education. As the world surges forward with online classes, issues of language also come to the fore. Should English be the lingua franca? What about those learners and students whose English proficiency is poor? There is also a need to equip newly qualified teachers with updated skills such as the use of technology in the classroom assessment, and developing the practicing teachers to be tech-savvy enough to adapt to the changing world. In this volume, therefore, authors seek to offer alternatives that could be used by universities and TVET colleges during training. The advent of COVID-19 has increased the need to accelerate the use of technology in today's African classroom. With the added burden of COVID-19, African higher education institutions find themselves in a dilemma of coping with the students' ever-increasing educational demands. Having appreciated this dire position of African higher education institutions, local and regional academics have contributed well-researched chapters that seek to establish ways of upscaling higher education institutions' education system to address various learning and innovation challenges. The contributors to this volume underscore the need to recalibrate the training of teachers in higher education institutions such as universities and teacher training colleges to meet the needs of today's techie-savvy generation of learners in schools. Therefore, in some chapters, the researchers have proposed models that could be used to alleviate the challenges of absenteeism, of technology and innovation in the classroom. You did ask me to highlight on the 3 parts of the book. Yes, indeed, this book comprises 3 parts which speak to different themes. The first part addresses the need to equip lecturers with online teaching skills. This first part focuses on the importance of technological literacy. It has come to the researchers' attention that lecturers should be tech-savvy to function optimally in today's teaching space. Lecturers must therefore have developed on the use of many technology-enabled platforms that can be used when teaching large numbers of students synchronously and asynchronously. The second part addresses the concern of resources, equity, and quality in teacher training institutions. In this part, the researchers trace the challenges facing higher education institutions dating back to the colonial regimes, imbalances that are a direct result of the inequitable distribution of resources during the period of Black repression, continue hampering the efforts of transformation of higher education institutions. The shortage of resources and continuously shrinking economies negatively affect learning and innovation strategies envisaged by African countries. The third and last part, though not least, of the volume suggests pedagogical strategies that may be considered for language and science teaching. The chapters address the need to reconsider the current teacher education system with a view of updating pedagogical skills at higher education institutions. The chapters detail the empirical finding of the various research projects that have been conducted to help develop higher education institutions to meet the world's current educational demands. It is sincerely hoped that this volume will provide universities with insights and alternatives of addressing pedagogical challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Washington. I think what you tell us about this book is a needy book to read if we think on what COVID-19 has bring us. We become tech savvy, and we also become thinking about new teaching strategies and to change our pedagogical content knowledge. So thank you, Prof. Washington, for your contribution, telling us more about this wonderful and remarkable AOSIS volume. I want to introduce you to our next guest, and this is my colleague, Dr. Adri du Toit. She's also from the Northwest University, and I know Dr. Adri du Toit as an expert in entrepreneurial education. Welcome, Dr. du Toit. Dr. du Toit, in your chapter, Transforming Higher Education for Self-Directed Employment, you mentioned that entrepreneurship education is often considered a solution to unemployment and should be integrated into existing learning programs. Could you give the readers and us a summary of why entrepreneurship education is necessary for our current learning programs and how your literature and data analysis led to your findings?
Thank you for this opportunity, Prof. Gideon and colleagues. It's lovely to be with you today. So in the book, my chapter is chapter 4, and it's Transforming Higher Education for Self-Directed Employment. And I want to start by answering your question, Prof. Gideon. Graduates in South Africa are definitely in trouble. We are spending a lot of money and a lot of time to educate these people, and then still the attrition rate is very high. And of those who actually complete their studies, increasingly reports are surfacing that graduates are not finding employment. And that's a problem if you consider how much time and money we have invested into these people. One of the key reasons emerging from literature is that universities are focusing on preparing students for employment by employers, rather than including learning which students could use to self-directedly develop their own employment based on what they learned in university education. We're seeing this across programs, also in the field in which I work a lot, which is teacher education. And one of the things is university education is very generic, and also it's so focused on employment that we are not looking at the life after graduation and preparing the graduates for coping with life after graduation. And to that extent, and this is why I think entrepreneurship education is so important, is the many cognitive or so-called 21st century skills. Wagner even calls it survival skills. And these are skills that the graduates need to not only survive, but to thrive in the world of work, but also in life after graduation. And therefore, entrepreneurship education can serve as a vehicle to provide university students, including teacher students, with more insights into how they can live their lives or structure their learning and opportunities to create their own employment after graduation. However, we can't just plonk in entrepreneurship education or use it as an add-on to existing graduate programs, and therefore it's really important to scaffold such learning very carefully. And this chapter then explored how entrepreneurship education should optimally be scaffolded for integration into existing South African university programs. And the reason why we want to not just create a separate entrepreneurship education program is most of our colleagues and readers will understand how complex and long it is a process to change university programs. So as a basis, I used 5 general elements that often emerges in literature for the structuring or scaffolding of entrepreneurship education. And it's often structured as 5 questions. So the first one is why. So what is the purpose or the rationale? Why do we include entrepreneurship education? The second one is for whom. So who is the target audience of such education? The third one is what, referring to content, the content, skills, values, the things we want to embed in such learning. The fourth one is the how, or the pedagogical approach to enable effective education, entrepreneurship education. And then the fifth one is for which result. So what is the intended outcomes of such education? And it seems quite simple, but I think it can become quite complicated. Yes. And then also we have this growing interest in Africanization of knowledge and learning and of tertiary education institutes in Africa as well. And for that reason, I wanted to explore what's happening in current African universities to see if there are patterns or things that we can learn from them. So as you said, Prof. Dion, I used a qualitative content analysis of purposely selected literature. It included 10 specific university countries and universities in countries, as well as 4 larger studies, including several different universities across different African countries. And I wanted to gain insight into the bigger picture of how African universities address these 5 elements or questions that I identified from literature. So very broadly, the finding says that in general, most African universities have for the why or the purpose of entrepreneurship education to reduce poverty and unemployment. So it is to create self-employment. The second finding is that generally the students targeted for entrepreneurship education are in the business management, economics programs, which is a problem because it's a very narrow focus and it will only reach a part of the students at universities. And then thirdly, the what. Again, the findings show that most African universities generally center entrepreneurship education around business plans and venture creation, or general knowledge about what entrepreneurship is. A bit of shining a light was a finding that there's a growing emphasis on also developing those very important 21st century skills that I've mentioned that's needed for the students to thrive in work and life. So that was really nice to find that. And also increasingly, there are reports surfacing from African universities really endeavoring to develop students' entrepreneurial mindset, their way of thinking and their way of approaching life and solving problems and so on. And then the fourth good finding related to the content was that there's increasing studies being conducted about how entrepreneurship education contributes to value creation, not only for the student or the graduate themselves, but also for a broader field of beneficence. So for the communities in which they work, if it's a student teacher, for the school in which they work, or in the place in which they contribute to solving problems. The fourth focus area that I investigated was the how. In other words, how are these programs being implemented? And unfortunately, that was towards the negative side, because still a lot of studies report that the way that lecturers implement entrepreneurship education is one of the biggest obstacles to the quality of entrepreneurship education and realizing all those intended benefits. And therefore, the need for training lecturers have been highlighted again as one of the key things that we have to do before we can successfully implement entrepreneurship education in our university programs. And then also a large emphasis on the need for linking the learning of the students to their own lived experiences. So the learning becomes meaningful in their own lives, and so they can see increasingly the value that it has, not only for job creation or creating employment, but for their own lives as well. And then the fifth element, the intent for entrepreneurship education, as is probably visible from the previous findings, it's mostly so that they can create their own businesses in African universities. However, we should more try to focus, I think, on social entrepreneurship, so creating change, not only for profit, and then also what I just mentioned in the previous finding about the value creation. So in conclusion, the chapter points out that entrepreneurship education inculcates competencies and skills that graduates will need for a meaningful life after graduation, and to help them adapt to all these various changes that's happening in the world. But to enable all these benefits of entrepreneurship education, it has to be very carefully structured and scaffolded, and it will have to be made available to a much broader cohort than only business studies or economics students. And based on the findings of the study, I made several recommendations informed by the insights I gained by looking at what African universities are doing to guide us in our development of programs for South African universities. But the readers will have to go and find that for themselves in our book. Thank you, Prof. Gideon.
Thank you, Adri. I just want to say thank you for your remarkable research on entrepreneurship education and your contribution towards developing suggestions for reducing graduate unemployment. I think the work that you do, and I know your work because I work in certain cases with you in this area, I think what you do is really important for our students, and and this is there's a need in this area. So thank you for your contribution, and we're looking forward for the research that you are going to do, and yes, and to elaborate on all these things and to alleviate, in a way, unemployment when our students get more entrepreneurial skills at the end of the day. But thank you for your time that you spent with us and elaborate on your research. Thank you, Dr. Adri.
Thank you, Prof. Gideon.
Yes, okay, then we have another contributor. Good morning, Prof. Bunt. How are you?
Hi there, Prof. Gideon. Finding yourself?
Fine, thank you. Now, Dr. Byron Bunt is one of my colleagues, and we work a lot together. Dr. Bunt focuses on developing students' creative and critical thinking skills through various teaching strategies. But Dr. Bunt is a specialist when it comes to game-based learning. This is always very interesting to work with him when it comes to game-based learning and how he can develop certain strategies on how all these type of strategies can help students become critical thinkers. And I want to thank you, Dr. Bunt, for sharing with the audience our chapter. Dr. Bunt and I was the author of chapter 2, Online Teaching During COVID-19 in the School of Commerce and Social Studies in Education. Dr. Bunt, please share your journey, our journey with the online program during COVID-19 with the readers, and additionally, could you briefly summarize the successful workflow plan that yielded successful results?
All right, thank you so much, Prof. Gideon van Tonder. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity. Yes, this was a very interesting work that we did. And as you know, it entails mostly COVID-19 related research as well. At the time when Gideon and myself were conceptualizing this, we thought, we've been seeing a lot of research on teaching and learning sort of like issues and problems that were cropping up, specifically at school level. What I mean there is, basic education, primary and secondary teachers, how they were trying to cope with the unfortunate pandemic that will hit us, and how do they navigate this new online world. And, we thought it best that we need to start introducing our, innovations that we were thinking about and how we were best going to still connect with our students. So a lot of the chapter reads very reflectively, and that is actually part of the sort of methodology that we adopted. First for myself, and I think for you, Prof. Dion, as well, we looked at it from an autoethnographic perspective,
Yes.
where we sort of reflected on our own practice and the decisions we made as a school, as a subject group. You know, I do history, Prof. Dion does the economics. But in any case, what we decided to do there, just a brief look at what we were discussing there, we were looking at things like, you know, these terms that have now become sort of secondhand for us now. We kind of had to go through a lot of birthing pains, kind of, if you want to use that analogy, knowing what the difference is between synchronous and asynchronous blended learning is, for instance. And looking at things like, you know, our institution or university that we work at the time, they were opting for the asynchronous route where, you know, the students didn't have to be present online, you know, doing MS Teams, Zoom meetings, all these things. So, yeah, we did recordings with the students of our lectures, and we uploaded them to our LMS, the learning management system of our university. And, you know, through this process, we had to learn, you know, the do's and don'ts for recording online, not to record an hour-long lesson. We had to keep it short and sweet. We had to really stick to the key topics, etc. That was the one hand. The other hand, then, what we sort of elaborate on a bit later in the paper is the marking, the assessment itself. And I think that's where we actually asked a lot of the lecturers in our school, you know, what their reflections were on using these online tools and, you know, working with online marking. I mean, we all had to now kind of get our assignments digitally, which was a pain at first. And, you know, a lot of this, we were offered training from our Center of Teaching and Learning as well. That did help staff in the beginning with a lot of these technological problems. But a lot of the reflections that came back said that digital marking versus, you know, marking by hand, some people were arguing that it took longer for them to navigate, you know, adding comments and, you know, just any sort of annotation to the online document. But yes, that's more or less the gist of the paper. You know, coming to your second question, Dion, the workflow itself was, you know, there's a diagram that we included, sort of like a flow map, if you want to call it that. You know, when we start with the LMS. The LMS was the heart of our approach that we used. And from there, we needed to look at what functionalities the LMS had and what limitations or what novel ideas we could use, you know, to still connect with our students. And of course, we also had to work with things like low tech, low immediacy. So any assessments that were done, you know, asynchronously, the students didn't have to do that thing immediately. They could take their own time. It was low tech as well. So we actually had to compress our recordings in the beginning. I remember that quite fondly. We had to figure out how to reduce a gigabyte recording to something like about 100 megabytes, even less than that. Otherwise, the students wouldn't be able to download or even just stream the recording from the LMS. And then, fortunately, what I think saved us as well was the national government's you know, plan or proposal to make LMS access free of charge. So, you know, all the usual cell phone networks, if students were logged in that way, they then were able to access all our presentations. So yeah, and then from there we also had to look at things like how do we enable group collaboration in an online setting. That was quite tricky to navigate, although we had some successes, I think, with Google Docs, where students could collaborate, you know, on an assignment in different groups, and they could, you know, with different colors, etc., they could show where they were working and where the other group members were working. So, you know, just I know this is more like hindsight now, but I think a lot of the skills we developed during the and how we addressed it, I think we've actually retained a lot of those skills. I think, technically speaking, for just to put it out there, I think the COVID-19 pandemic actually revolutionized the digital transformation of our university. I think, Dion, you might agree with that, because now everyone is basically an expert in blended learning. So yeah, from our findings, you can read in the chapter as well, there were mixed views, but at the end of the day, I think it was an important learning curve for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bunt. Yes, for myself as a baby boomer, I've learned a lot. It was like since COVID-19, I've learned technology as in the speed of light. So because we have to, and I must say that was for me absolutely a very nice journey, and I will never regret this. I think our readers must actually go and read this chapter, because there is a lot of things that they can learn from. And thank you for your contribution to share this to our audience. Thank you, Dr. Bunt. I appreciate it. I want to introduce you to our last but not least, Dr. Kgomotsego. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Samuel. She is a senior lecturer at the Maikeng campus of our Northwest University. With Prof. Washington was the co-author of chapter 10, and that was the last chapter in the book. But I must say, this chapter served as a fitting end to this volume. And the title of this chapter was Pedagogical Empowerment of Newly Qualified Physical Science Teachers. Dr. Samuel, you focused on classroom practices and the growth and development of science teachers' pedagogical content knowledge. You are the expert in this. Both you and Prof. Washington are experts in science education. And Prof. Washington, you can come in this conversation, and you can maybe support Dr. Samuels. In your conclusion in your chapter, you stated that there is, therefore, a need to recalibrate teacher training to include and emphasize both content and pedagogy. Can you and Prof. Washington elaborate on the main parts of your chapter and why you envisage this statement? The floor is open to you.
Thank you, Prof. Dion. Good morning, colleagues, once again. I'm not going to answer directly or first time. I'm going to go first through what the chapter is all about. Then at the end, you will get my answer. Yes. So basically this chapter.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I'm saying that basically this chapter focused on strengthening beginning physical science teachers' classroom pedagogical competencies to promote 21st century skills. That is both for the learners and the teachers as their 21st century skill teaching strategy, while they themselves become self-directed in utilizing PBL in the teaching and learning of all the topics. But in this particular chapter, a chapter or a topic known as particulate nature of matter was selected. So this can be done in many ways. In this particular study, it was done in the Professional Development Intervention Program. So this idea of strengthening beginning teachers' pedagogical competencies is prompted by the concerns regarding pedagogical competency of the beginning teachers when they come from their institutions of higher learning. They struggle with putting into practice the theory that they have learned in that institution. And then some authors also even have written and argued that higher institutions of learning are often too theoretical, with insufficient integration between theory and practice. And from your chapter, Prof. Dion, you have even stated that the beginning teachers who enter the school from institutions of higher learning need to be recalibrated because they enter into the workplace with different reasons, such as having to be successful where they teach and the growth in their professional development. This also include the success which they desire into the groups that they teach. However, out of this overwhelming pressure to move with time and under the circumstances that they don't have control over, these beginning teachers just have to tick boxes. And circumstances I'm talking about here are overcrowded classrooms, inadequate supply of resources, congested curriculum, ill-disciplined learners, and so many others. So they have to now run after completing the curriculum. They just have to list the dates of when they have completed what topic, what assessment they have written, and how many assessments they have covered for them to fulfill the mandate of the department that is just running after curriculum without them having to be introduced, inducted, and being given a way how to do things practically. We don't say that we don't train them in that, but there is a difference to learning and reality. So they need to be given such guidance. And at school, you'll find that those who are supposed to be their mentors, they have just limited guidance to these beginning teachers, meaning that now these teachers have to fend for themselves. And the first thing they do to satisfy the requirements of the department is to run after time, forgetting what they have learned and forgetting that they need to improve while they're in practice. So over and above all these challenges, in our chapter now, we have stressed on self-directedness and problem-based learning. So they have to be, or they are expected to be self-directed to implement strategies such as the PBL. Now, being self-directed learner or being self-directed as an individual, Noel says that you must be able to initiate with or without other people your action. You need to diagnose your own learning needs. You need to set yourself a goal. You need to find strategies that you will implement to move into the learning that you desire. You must find the resources that you need, including human resource, that is finding people around you whom you think can direct you according to what you wish to achieve. And you have to also find strategies on how to implement, such that at the end you can look and evaluate the outcomes of the whole process you have been through. Now, this is also something that if you stick to practicing this, if you are having these values as stated by Noels, you are also improving your PCK as a learning teacher. And then the other thing is that you need to also implement strategies such as PBL. Now, you must be self-directed. You must be a self-directed learner yourself as a teacher, and you must also implement strategies that will build your learners to become what KEPS envisage. So being able to implement the PBL, you need to have thorough preparation and planning. The first thing is that the teacher in PBL, being a teacher who is self-directed, you need to be a knowledgeable other in front of your learners. So the selected topic here in the chapter, particulate nature of matter, seems to be a simple, but it is a demanding topic. Demanding in the sense that a teacher's PCK must be strong and firm, because you may come to class thinking that I'm going to teach changes in the phases of matter, and you don't know how much the learners know, and you don't know how much it is demanding for you to convince and prove to the learners the scientific root of seeing things in that way of changing matter from one state to another. So before implementing PBL, before you say you are self-directed, the teacher needs to reflect on action, because you don't enter the classroom before you ask yourself questions that you have imagined learners asking you. Otherwise, you get into class thinking that I'm going to implement a PBL task, and you find that children misunderstand you. They get misled to think that it is time for them to waste time and play. Of course, learning can be through playing, but if the teacher is not self-directed, if the teacher is unable to give learners direction, then there is a lot of time being wasted. So proper guideline must be prepared by this teacher as a facilitator. Now, in facilitating the PBL task, which is part of the focus in this chapter, the teacher should be capable of inculcating into the learners the 21st century skills, which this study has listed as collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking, what we mention here as 4 C's. The teacher must be able to provide the learners with explicit instruction on how to share responsibilities and evidence of interdependence. So the learners must be able to communicate, and they must communicate information and collaboratively learn from one another, with one another. So the ability to communicate and collaborate is very important for the current cohort of learners, because as we speak, we are lamenting a lot on unemployment and learners lacking a lot of skills. But we forget that we come from the background where we should have been the ones to inculcate this to them. So they need to collaborate as an important skill for them to build or to exist within their community. So they must be critical thinkers in order for them to rationally analyze and solve problems. Now, I think I'll come to your answer, Prof. So the main findings here of this study indicated that the physical science teachers possess limited pedagogical competencies when they enter the teaching profession as employees of the Department of Basic Education. As such, this study then recommends continuous and intensified teacher development training for the beginner teachers in order to expose them to the use of PBL as a 21st century teaching skill for them to be self-directed. So yes, in our conclusion, we said what you have mentioned, Prof. This study concluded that there is a need to recalibrate teacher training to include emphasis, both content and pedagogy, because physical science, being a gateway subject, forms a foundation for all engineering fields, which have a high contribution to the country's economy. In turn, the teachers who have to provide this foundation might be well informed and prepared in both subject and content as they continue their practice. So the recalibration teacher training, which include both content and pedagogy, might inform the DBE of the importance of involvement of beginner teachers in the PDIs, the professional development interventions, to allow them to understand PBL, its role and importance, thereby equipping the learners with the necessary skills to build the kind of learner envisaged by CAPS. Thank you, Prof. I hope I answered.
Yes, you answered my question, and you speak my language, because of everything that you say is absolutely what I am believing in and in working in. So thank you, and I really enjoyed your chapter. I've read it, and I really enjoyed it. Prof. Washington, are there anything that you want to add to this? What Dr. Samuel said?
I don't want to spoil the well narrated and well described. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for your contribution to this book. You were really you really bring us a lot of insight to this book, and I want to thank all of you, all of the guests that take the time and the effort to participate in this interview. And I think our readers will definitely have a good insight of this remarkable book. And thank you to AOSIS for publishing this wonderful work of us. And yes, and I appreciate everyone's time for this interview, and thank you for your contribution and the research that you are doing, and to get it out there so that people can read this, because it's very necessary that we do and carry on with research, so that at the end of the day that we can support our students, our learners, to become better citizens in South Africa. Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate what you have done. Thank you.
Thank you. As you explore the book and its contents, and any queries arise, please reach out to the editors via contact details provided within the book. We value the time you have invested discussing this book's discourse and anticipate the grand heights this book will reach.